Alright, so leather. This is what we're making today. A material to make leather. You can see it here on a plane and on a sphere. This is the graph. We're going to be reconstructing this entire thing. It's not that complicated altogether. So we have a sphere and a plane set up for two different kinds of references. And first things first, we're going to add a Voronoi texture. And with Node Wrangler enabled, Ctrl-T for the textual coordinates mapping. We're going to set that to being object rather than generated. And just because we're going to need it later, we're going to actually copy this Voronoi texture twice. So that we'll have 3 in total, because we're going to have 3 different scales of Voronoi. Hook up the vector to all of them, of course. We'll preview the first one, and we'll actually keep that at roughly this scale. That seems pretty good, actually. Then the second one, we're going to make a bit smaller, and then the third one is going to be very, very small and have a very high detail. Then pulling off this top one, we're going to get a mix color node, and we're going to mix it with the middle one. Let's preview that. And in order to drive the factor of the mixing here, we're going to use a normal noise texture. We can use the factor out of that, go into a color ramp to have a little bit more control over exactly what everything looks like as far as like the pattern here. And there we can just increase the contrast a fair bit and then decrease the scale quite a bit. And that can go into the factor of the mix RGB node. And now, as we can see, we've got the bigger texture here and the smaller texture everywhere else. You can play around with that a little bit more if you like, just to see what kind of look you personally like. And then we'll do the exact same thing again. So copy over this noise texture here, copy over this mix node, and then the output of the previous mix node is going to go into color 1, and the distance from our last Voronoi texture is going to go into the bottom color here. Of course, the noise texture is going to be the factor, and we need to change around the noise texture a little bit here as well. So be a little bit more careful with this one, because you don't want the very, very high detail one to come through in a lot of places, but you definitely want some amount of that. Play around a little bit with the scale. Maybe this one can have a slightly higher scale. And now we can see we have the 3 different types of noise pattern we have. We have the big, the medium, and the very, very small noise pattern detail. That can then go into a bump node, into the height input, so that we can make a normal map out of that, and then we can see that it gives us a little bit of texture. We're going to invert it though. And this is slowly starting to look like the kind of thing we want. Maybe we want to decrease the strength a little bit. This is very much up to your own preference and just how much bumpiness you need in your leather. You could just make this brown and that would do fine. You probably want to put the roughness up a little bit. Not too much though, because you do want a little bit of shininess in your leather. But this just doesn't quite work, does it? So we're going to use a color ramp to add a little bit more color variation to our material here. So we can really just steal away this setup here, because it's going to be very similar. Noise texture into a color ramp, but instead of it going black to white, we can actually use colors here. So let's do a darker orangey brown to a slightly lighter brown color. Not quite this light though, something more like this. And then we preview that. We don't want the scale too small here, so make it a nice big noise. Probably increase the detail a fair bit though, because we don't really need it to be too blurry. And of course you can play around with the values here and see what you like and what you don't like. But something like this actually seems pretty good. So now that we put that into the base color, if we preview the entire material, we can see we have a leathery material now. Now the original you saw at the beginning of the video was much darker. That is very much just a matter of playing around with the colors you see here. This is a lot closer to what we had, and if we go over to Cycles render engine here, just to have the just so that we can get the experimental feature set, and we add a modifier to this. Go subdivision surface, simple, adaptive. Now we can actually add in some more dynamic displacement as well. So we can use this output from this mix RGB node into a displacement node's height input as well. And that will then start generating the displacement for the leather, just to give it a little bit more of that bumpy feeling beyond just the normals. So again, we obviously do want that to be inverted. So we can add a invert color node with the input going into the color. And this way we actually have the bumpiness matching the normals. And then of course you can mess around with scale of the displacement a bit. You don't want to go too much overboard with this because it starts looking very not good very quickly. So be very careful with the amount of displacement you add. And now that we have this entire setup, it's just a matter of playing around with all these parameters until we have something we're happy with. Of course, it's better to do that in Material Preview than the actual render view. So maybe these big bumps are a little bit too big, so we can actually increase the scale of those to make them a little bit smaller. And maybe this is something we just like a little bit more. Maybe the normals are still a little bit too strong. Now that we have color, we can see that, so we can decrease the strength on those a little bit. If you find yourself being stuck here with the strength of your displacement and you need to fine tune a little bit more, one neat little trick that you can do is you can actually just add a divide node in between here, and that will pretty much do the same thing but give you a little bit finer control over that parameter. But for this instance, I don't think we really need it. So with a little playing around with these parameters, we have a even better leathery looking material, and it's as easy as that.